back by popular demand. It's that champion of liberty, the leader of men, and the people's economist, former chairman of George Mason University's Economics Department, Dr. Walter E. Williams.
That is absolutely right. This is Dr. Walter E. Williams sitting in for Rush on the last Friday of the year. And I'm going to spend the last Friday of the year doing what I typically do, and that is pushing back the frontiers of ignorance and trying to sell my fellow American on the moral superiority of liberty and its major ingredient, limited government, as the founders of our great nation envisioned. Now, since it's the last day of the year, we're going to have a modified Open Line Friday. Now, what that means is, I've been substituting for 14 years, and if there's anything that you want to take issue with me over these last 14 years and over my syndicated columns that are published nationally and internationally over the last 25 years, you can call in with your disagreement or your question, and I invite, not necessarily people who agree with me, but I invite liberals. That is, people who think that the government should have more control over my life. They should also call in, and I'm going to ask my sharp call screener, Kit Carson, to just let these people in and come and talk with me, and I can show them where they are wrong and I am right. Okay. Now, there's one breaking news before we really get into the program. And I guess just a few minutes ago, maybe an hour ago, the United States authorities turned over Saddam Hussein to the Iraqi authorities. And according to the predictions, his hanging is imminent. And so I have the televisions on, and so I'll keep you up to date as the show progresses. But what I want to start off today, I want to talk about our late former president, Ford. And let me first say, before we start, that I think that President Ford was a decent man, and he's worthy of our respect. But there are a lot of things that are being said in the news media about President Ford's time during when he was president that I think is just plain wrong. One thing that they're saying is that his pardon of Richard Nixon healed the country. Well, that's kind of questionable in my opinion. First of all, we have to ask the question, who was for Nixon? That is, it turned out that Senator Goldwater headed a delegation to Nixon's office and told him that he had no support on his impeachment. And he had no support anywhere in the United States. Maybe a little tiny bit of support, but there was not 50% of Americans for Nixon and 50% of Americans against him. And so I think that pardoning Nixon was a mistake. And his other mistake, I think, was the appointment to the Supreme Court of John Paul Stevens. And John Paul Stevens is a Supreme Court justice that I think, according to his opinions, he appointed a person who has disrespect for the United States Constitution. And just look over his decisions and you can see this. Then another part of the Ford presidency, I'm not necessarily being critical of Ford, but we just want to look at some things in the past so that we can better gauge the future or know what to prepare ourselves for future events. Remember, during the 1970s, there was a lot of inflation. And the Ford administration, they started inflation campaigns, such as Whip Inflation Now. That is, you wear these win buttons. And then plant a vegetable garden. That would help with inflation. And then turn down your thermostats. That would cut the demand for fuel and help restrain price increases. As a matter of fact, I don't think it was during the Ford administration, but I think during the Carter administration, they were even suggesting sending Boy Scouts to people's houses to see whether they had their thermostat set on 68. Now, I commented during the time, and I can't quite say on this show what I actually said to the person who asked me about this Boy Scout business, but I told him what I would do to a Boy Scout who came to my house wanting to check my thermostat. He would be in bad shape. But let's think about inflation. Inflation's not caused by rapacious businessmen or greedy unions and or oil prices. Ladies and gentlemen, inflation everywhere is a monetary phenomenon. That is, there's an increase in supply of money. And who is in charge of increasing the supply of money? It's the government. And so what we need to do to handle inflation, we need to have a sensible monetary policy. Now, you can kind of think about, let me give you an example or a little experiment that you can do to check inflation. A lot of people have a Monopoly game. And there's a fixed amount of money in the Monopoly game. Now, imagine somebody charges, I don't know, $20,000 or let's say $5,000 for Boardwalk. Well, Boardwalk's prices will go up, but not every single price. That is, if Boardwalk prices go up, other prices will have to go down. Now, inflation is defined as a general increase in prices. That is, all prices rise together, as we saw during the 70s, as we see during any inflation. Now, here's a little trick to get all prices rising in your Monopoly game. That is, the next time you go over to somebody's house to play Monopoly, sneak your money into the game. That is, take the money from your game and sneak it into the game. And then you will see all prices rising. But if you have a fixed amount of money, you're never going to see all prices rising. Another thing that happened perhaps towards the end of the Ford administration and the beginning of the Carter administration, we had something called stagflation. That is, we had the combination of prices rising, and we also had the combination of rising unemployment. And Keynesian economists had been talking about the so-called Phillips curve. And they said, well, there's a trade-off between inflation and unemployment. That is, as inflation goes up, unemployment goes down, or as if you try to lower inflation, unemployment will rise. Well, that theory was thoroughly discredited during the 1970s. As a matter of fact, much of the Keynesian, Sir Maynard Keynes, the famous economist that produced a work during the 30s and 40s, commenting on it was a general theory of employment. I forget the full title. They typically call it the general theory. But anyway, that was thoroughly discredited during the 1970s. Anyway, so let's keep in mind, before you people call and saying, well, I'm speaking ill of the dead, I'm not speaking ill of the dead. I'm saying that President Ford was a decent man, he was a respectful man, and he's worthy of our respect. But I'm just kind of pointing out some things that were said in news media that are absolutely false and you should not pay attention to. And I also pointed out that his Supreme Court appointment, John Paul Stevens, I think was a disastrous choice. And Americans are paying for it today, and we're going to continue to pay for it. We'll be back with your calls after this.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
We're back. Walter Williams sitting in for the Vacation Rush. And Rush will be back on Wednesday, and Roger Hedgecock will be in on Tuesday. And you can be on by calling 1-800-282-2882. Let's go to the phones right now, and let's take a call from Robert. Robert from Santa Rosa, California. Welcome to the show, Robert.
Yeah, hello, Dr. Williams.
Hi.
Thank you for taking my call. Unfortunately, I have a bone to pick with you, sir. Bottom line is I took your advice in regards to gift giving for my wife, and she hasn't spoken to me since Christmas.
What happened?
Well, you know, I remember you saying once before when you subbed for Rush how you had bought your wife a pair of golf shoes so she wouldn't slip and hurt herself while she washed your car.
Yeah?
Well, I took that advice. I went out, I got the best pair of golf shoes money could buy, and my wife, she's just angry. She hasn't washed my car since either.
That's very unappreciative of your lady.
Well, it sure is.
And let me give the audience some background on this. This is a number of years ago. It was around Christmas time, and somebody called in and said, well, Professor Williams, what did you get Mrs. Williams for Christmas? And so I told her I got a set of golf shoes. She doesn't play golf, but the golf shoes have cleats on it, and so she doesn't slide around in the winter once she's washing my car. And then I had another gift. You know, as a matter of fact, Mrs. Williams had a very short duration in the hospital a couple of years ago, and her doctor told her that she shouldn't be lifting heavy things. So I got her, and I always wrap my gifts very nicely. I got her a little tiny shovel that doesn't hold much snow at a time when she's shoveling my driveway, she's not lifting up a whole lot of snow. And these have been very innovative gifts on my behalf. And matter of fact, and those of you who think I oppress Mrs. Williams, we've been married 47 years, so evidently she's very grateful of my company. But since people have been critical, they're saying, well, Williams, Professor Williams, you always give Mrs. Williams self-serving gifts, that is, gifts that help you. And so this year I've been a little bit different. I've been a little more caring. And so I looked around, and matter of fact, here's what I suggested, guys. I said, look around the house and look for what you're going to have to buy anyway and get that for the gift. So this year I got her some lipstick, I got her some deodorant, and I got her actually a half dozen of stockings and bobby pins, and I wrapped them all very nicely, and I presented her on Christmas Day. And she just looked at me a kind of certain way, you know, very lovingly, though. I interpreted the glance very lovingly. And then there's one final improvement. Now, you guys might really think about this, because Mrs. Williams and I, we are in our 70s, and we only have 30 or 40 more years to live anyway. And so you got to start preparing for one's own death and what you're going to do. And so I have an estate plan whereby the instructions of my estate plan, not to bury me or to cremate me, is that the instructions are that Mrs. Williams have to take me to a taxidermist and have me stuffed, and the fellow who will hand out the money, my executor, will just kind of go by the house and see whether I'm sitting at the kitchen table or see whether I'm sitting in front of the television, and then give Mrs. Williams the money. But I just don't want to leave this earth. And so those are the instructions for Mrs. Williams on my demise. But let's go to Frank in Troy, New York. He wants to talk about the Nixon pardon. Welcome to the show, Frank.
Yes, good afternoon, Dr. Williams. Pleasure to talk to you, and I would never have thought you were in your 70s if you didn't say so.
Oh, well, you know, the average person, actually, you can go to my website, it's walterewilliams.com, and I have a very, very handsome picture that the ladies all thrilled with, and the average person would guess me, a kid, what would you say, about 41, 45?
Well, I'm 41.
Yeah. Well, kids
I'll say 51 just to be safe.
Okay, right. But what's your comment or observation?
Right. Well, my thought, again, I was 8 years old when the Ford presidency began, and I didn't even know about a presidential pardon at the time. So my research on that all came later on in life, and my thoughts on it were, and again, I don't have a problem with your take on it, just want to present an argument of my own on the other side, is that the act of pardoning got Congress and the country away from something that was bogging it down and able to go on to bigger and better things. And
well, I think that it's good for the country to have Congress bogged down. That is, they can do fewer harmful things to the nation if they're bogged down, by the way.
Well, I won't argue that either. No, you're right with that. Although I will say that by the time it came around for Carter, it was definitely time to come along. Now, when Carter's term ended, or when Reagan was close to being elected, I remember getting materials handed in school that was along that, if we're not careful, Carter might be just a one-term president like Millard Fillmore. And they were trying to indoctrinate us back then, even, in school about that.
Well, that's those are some additional thoughts. But thank you for your call. Let's go to Geneseo. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
No, Geneseo.
Geneseo. He's from Ontario, Canada.
Yeah, it's a Italian name. My dad, he went to pick up Time magazine, and then he picked up the Bible, and he looked in the Bible to Genesis, and he said Geneseo.
Okay, great.
Put an O and N kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just calling. Like in Canada, we have Medicare, and I think it's a good thing because when my dad 10 years ago he had surgery, the bill was $126,000 because of paid through the tax system. It didn't put my dad into jeopardy or whatever, because we collectively, as a society, pay, like, insurance, you pull money kind of thing. And I'm thinking...
You think it's a good system?
Universal health care was started by Thomas C. Douglas in Saskatchewan in 1944. His grandson is Kiefer Sutherland.
Well, let me run a few questions by, because I think the audience might be interested in some of the issues in Canada's single-payer system. There's the Fraser Institute in Vancouver, British Columbia. Each year they publish a waiting list, how long Canadians have to wait for various kinds of surgery. And I'm looking at the waiting list right now. It's on their site. It's the Fraser Institute.
Okay.
And it turns out that the average waiting time in Canada for a hip replacement surgery is 54 weeks. And matter of fact, because people in Canada wait so long for hip replacement, Cleveland, Ohio is Canada's hip replacement center. That is, people come from Canada to Cleveland. And let me just give a couple more. There's for cornea transplant, you have to wait 42 weeks. For cardiac surgery, you don't have to wait that long. It's only 8 weeks you have to wait. And this is the waiting times from going from a specialist to the actual surgery. And so there are huge waiting times. Matter of fact, in Canada, a lot of people die while they're waiting for a particular procedure. And by the way, so far as brain surgery is concerned, you people should check on my website, walterewilliams.com, and click on, I believe it's titled Canadian Brain Surgery. It's the first on the list underneath there. And you'll see that, in my opinion, that Americans are not going to want anything to do with a health system like Canada has. But they might right now because they think it's good. They see it as a free thing. They see it as a great thing. But once we have it, and once women have to wait 3 months for a pap smear or 2 months for a pap smear, they're not going to like it. And we'll be back with more of your calls after this.
Champion of Liberty.
By an economist from Princeton University, Paul Krugman. And the gist of the column is that, as a matter of fact, the title of the column is called A Failed Revolution. And Krugman is talking about the Republican failure since Republicans have been in office, held the power in Washington since 1994. And he talks about the Republicans' failure to cut back government. Now, is it really a failure, regardless of who's in, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, to cut back government? I don't know. And that is, can we reasonably ask the politician to do what he considers to be political suicide? That is, to end various handout programs. Now, I blame politicians just a little bit, not by not providing us leadership, but the bulk of the blame, ladies and gentlemen, lies with you and me, the American people, because politicians are doing precisely what we elect them to office to do. And what do we elect them to office to do? Think about this for a moment. We elect them to office to use the power of their office to take the rightful property of one American and bring it back to us. That is, we elect them to office to engage in legalized theft. Now, you say, what do you mean by this, Walter? Well, first of all, we have to recognize that government has no resources of its very own. Secondly, we have to recognize that there's no tooth fairy or Santa Claus that gives them the money that supports these various programs that we want. Now, when you recognize that government has no resource of its very own, that forces you to recognize that the only way the government can give one American citizen $1 is to first, through intimidation, threats, and coercion, confiscate that dollar from some other American. That is, I believe Americans love government. Why? They love government because government allows us to do things and to realize things that if we did the same thing privately, we'd be sent to jail. Now, let me give you an example of that. I could see an elderly lady sleeping on the grate in the dead of winter in downtown New York. This lady needs some medical attention, she needs some food, and she needs some shelter. Now, I could walk up to any one of you with a gun in my hand and say, give me your $200. Then, having gotten your $200, I could go down and buy the lady some medical attention, get her some shelter, and buy her some food. Now, would anybody in the audience see me as guilty of a crime? I think you would. You'd be guilty. You'd see that I'm guilty of theft regardless of what I did with the money. Because what is theft? Theft is taking the rightful property of one person and giving it to another to whom it does not belong. Now, I think most of you could agree with me. No question. Now, here's the problem. Is there any distinction between that act and when the agents of the United States Congress comes up to me and says, Williams, you know that $200 you made last week that you had planned to buy a nice bottle of Chateau de Chem Sauterne wine? You will not use the money for that purpose. You'll give it to us, and we will help the lady sleeping on the grate. Well, what's the difference between those two acts? Both acts involve taking the rightful property of one person and giving it to another to whom it does not belong. And if you press me for a distinction between the two acts, the only difference I can find is the first act was illegal theft, and the second is legalized theft. Now, so here's the big problem. Now, if I went downtown and if I took somebody else's money to help that lady out, then I'd be sent to jail. But however, if I got Congress to legislate and take somebody's money, I'm seen as compassionate. to help the person. Oh, Williams is so caring. I'd be in the news and everything. Oh, Williams is just a wonderful guy. So that's what I mean when I say people love government. Many Americans love government because it enables them to achieve things that if they did privately, they'd be sent to jail. But doing it through government, they're seen as compassionate. Now, don't confuse me, ladies and gentlemen. I believe in helping our fellow man. I believe that reaching into one's own pockets to help one's fellow man is praiseworthy and laudable. Reaching into somebody else's pocket to help your fellow man, I think is despicable. Now, I know many of you people out there are Christians. And Christians ought to be upset with this because when God gave Moses the commandment, thou shalt not steal, I'm sure that God didn't mean thou shalt not steal unless you got a majority vote in Congress. I'm very sure about that. Then also, it's not in the commandment, but if you were to ask God, well, you say, God, is it okay to be a recipient of stolen property? What do you think he would say? I think he would say that is a sin as well. But see, here's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the big problem, and which is the supreme tragedy for our nation, and it's going to lead to our undoing, is that so far as personal interests are concerned, it pays Americans to do what they've been doing. I mean, imagine that, let's say you're in North Carolina. I live in North Carolina. And say I'm running for the United States Senate. And during my campaign, I go back and forth across the state, and I say, look, I've read the United States Constitution. When I take an oath of office to uphold and defend the United States Constitution, I mean it if you elect me to the Senate. I'm going to obey the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution that enables me to bring back funds to North Carolina for highway construction, handouts to farmers, meals on wheels, aid to higher education. Do you think I would get elected to the Senate from North Carolina? No, I wouldn't. Because North Carolinians, they would be acting in their self-interest not to elect me to the Senate. Because if I don't bring back billions of dollars to North Carolinians, it doesn't mean that North Carolinians will pay a lower federal income tax. All that it means is that the money will go instead to South Carolina. So, when Congress establishes the rule that one American can live at the expense of another American, then it pays for all Americans to try to live at the expense of each other. Or another way of putting it, once legalized theft begins, it pays for everybody to get involved. Those who don't get involved wind up holding the brown end of the stick. And for those of you with a rural background, you know what I mean. We'll be back with your calls after this. This is Walter Williams, back with you, pushing back frontiers of ignorance, and let's go to the phones. John in Orlando, Florida. Welcome to the show, John.
Yes, Dr. Williams, it's an honor to talk to one of the greatest minds in American history, in my opinion.
Well, thank you.
But seeing that the lifespan of most democracies in history have been about 200 years, and the picture you just painted before is basically, in my opinion, where we're headed. I want to ask you about two things that possibly could extend our lifespan, if you will. One being the fair tax, and the second being how, if we limited who could vote, meaning if you're on a government assistance, you lose your right to vote until you are no longer receiving that assistance. In your opinion, what do you think about those two things possibly extending our march towards socialism?
Well, that's a hard question. Now, just let me brief the audience on Congressman Representative Linder's idea on the fair tax. He proposes, at least according to the book I read, that he and Neil Bortz in Atlanta, Georgia, I believe, they're calling for a sales tax on all of our purchases. I think it'll be around 23%, which they say is revenue neutral. It will generate the same revenue as the current income tax code, and elimination of all other federal taxes. And clearly, I would say that some taxes are worse than other taxes. As a matter of fact, the income tax is an abomination, and just one form of the abomination is that in terms of just complying with the income tax code, and forget about the amount of money that you send in, it takes billions of hours. Matter of fact, the estimate is it takes 5.8 billion hours of record keeping, filing taxes, consulting with legal and accounting. And it turns out that breaking these hours down into a 40-hour week, it translates into a workforce of about 2.77 million people. And that's more than the workforce of our automobile, aircraft, and computer and steel manufacturing industries. That is, we're kind of throwing all that into the drink because of this very cumbersome income tax code.
Yeah, I think Bortz, too, they said that the compliance cost is around $500 billion a year.
Yeah. I'm not I don't really recall the figure, but you could absolutely be right. Now, but there's an issue. I have some reservations about the fair tax, and this is my reservation. That is, I think that I would only support the fair tax if we first repeal the 16th Amendment, creating the income tax. Because I guarantee you, if we don't do that and we have a fair tax, well, and we legislate pass a fair tax, it's going to mean that we're going to have a national sales tax plus an income tax. And so what we have to do, we have to repeal the 16th Amendment. But I wrote a column on this several weeks ago, and I think that the American people, we have to be concerned with one thing so far as this our relationship with government. That is, the true measure of the effect of government on our lives is not how much government taxes us, but how much government spends. Spending is what we should look at. And from 1787, the inception of our nation, to 1920, the federal government was only 3% of the GNP, except during wartime. Today, the federal government is over 20% of the GNP. Now, if the federal government is only 3% of the GNP, then any kind of tax system is okay. It's not going to be burdensome. But if government spending rises to 20, 30, 50, 60% of the GNP, well then no kind of tax system is going to be helpful to us, because we have to keep in mind that the true measure of federal spending in our of our relationship with the federal government is federal spending. For example, the federal government does not have to tax us at all in order to get resources. That is, the federal government can just print money. Of course, if it just printed money to fund its activities, there'd be a rampant inflation. But the point, ladies and gentlemen, that they don't have to tax us at all. They can either print money, inflate the currency, because that's what inflation is. It's a sneaky form of taxation. Or they can just run deficits by going into the bond market or the borrowing market and driving up interest rates. See, you have to keep in mind, in order for government to spend out of our GNP, which is around $13 trillion, if the government wants to spend $2 or $3 trillion of that GNP that we produce this year, it has to somehow get us not to spend $2 or $3 trillion. One way to get us not to spend is to tax us. But another way is to inflate the currency, because if prices go up, we can buy less. Or another way is to force us not to spend is to enter the bond market and bid up interest rates. And so that means we can do less investment, less buying houses, cars, et cetera, et cetera. So, ladies and gentlemen, the key thing is for us to pay attention to government spending. And matter of fact, if government obeyed the United States Constitution, if our senators and our Congress representatives obeyed the United States Constitution, the federal budget would be roughly 1/3 of what it is today. We'll be back with more of your calls after this.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
We're at the end of the first hour, and we can take one more call from Brian in Lincoln, Nebraska. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Hi, Walter. I have a question regarding the use of the military with a tight monetary policy as you described earlier in your show. I'm in total agreement with you regarding inflation and how big the government should be, but it occurred to me that it might be difficult to fight wars like Iraq and just in general to have our military gallivanting all over the world if we had such a tight monetary policy. And GNP, as you described, or federal spending, as you described, is just 3% of GNP. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Well, we fought a number of wars when the federal spending was just 3% of the GNP. And matter of fact, as I said in my statement, I said that we went from 1787 to 1920, except during wartime, the federal government only spent 3% of the GNP. But however, the federal government can wage a war if we cut spending. I mean, we did not have all the kind of spending that we have now, and we fought World War I, and that was won.
Would you agree, though, that it might be a different question to Americans if the president had to come to the nation and say, we're going to go to Iraq for however long we're going to go, and it's going to cost $1 trillion or whatever, and Americans are going to feel it in their pocketbook rather than just print more money or borrow more money?
That is absolutely right. That is when the cost of war is truly revealed. And the one way that we conceal the cost of war is through inflating the currency and, as I wrote in the column for this week, having the military draft that understates the true cost of war. So if we get back to the way that the Constitution dictates how our country should be run, we'll be much better off, and our children will be much better off too. We'll be back the next hour.
Sitting in the Attila the Hun chair before the golden EIB microphone, and like the fearless founders of our great nation, he's trying to sell his fellow Americans on the moral superiority of liberty and its main ingredient, limited government. It's none other than that charming and lovable Walter E. Williams.
That's right, absolutely right, Jonathan. It's that handsome, charming Walter E. Williams. And look, folks, there are a couple other items that we need to talk about. One, I think it's kind of important for our nation, and that's the Duke University lacrosse case. And it turns out now, after having been charged with rape, 3 Duke lacrosse players haven't been charged with rape. The rape charges have been dropped. And it turns out that at Nifong, he's the attorney, Attorney General, or he's prosecutor, Michael Nifong, district attorney in Durham. He found out, well, there's no DNA evidence. And matter of fact, it's no evidence at all that those lacrosse players had much to do with the girl anyway. And it turns out that she probably was not raped by the lacrosse players. And first, the Nifong said that they raped her. And then he said, well, since there's no DNA evidence there, well, they might have been using condoms. And given our technology today, you can detect DNA. If I shake your hand, there's DNA evidence on your hand from me. And so the guys might have been using a whole body condom. Anyway, he's being, I guess, brought up on charges by the bar for improper conduct. Improper conduct like calling the young men hooligans. He violated the ethic rules because calling somebody a hooligan is likely to heighten public condemnation of the accused. But here's the issue. Why was this guy doing it? Now, Nafong is a white guy, and he was running for election, and he needed the black vote. And he figured that if he would charge these guys, these Duke lacrosse players, of raping this black woman, that he would get the black vote. And indeed, he did get elected to office with a considerable amount of the black vote. He's running for re-election. And I think it's part of a process that's going on in the United States now, where people are using race for a number of nefarious reasons. I don't think that he should be facing. I don't think that this guy Nafong should be facing ethic complaints. I think that he should be facing firing from his job. And I believe that the defense lawyers for the Duke lacrosse players ought to bring some kind of civil suit against the guy for a whole lot of money. And maybe he'll wind up in debtor's prison. There's another issue that's on the table because the Democrats now have control of the Congress. And I think they're going to address the rights of terrorists. That is, they're going to revisit, according to this article, one of the most contentious national security issues, deciding what legal rights must be protected for detainees held in the war on terrorism. Well, how much rights do they have? How many rights do they have? Now, a lot of people say, well, there's Geneva Convention. Look, folks, Geneva Convention applies to men in uniform. It applies to soldiers in uniform, and they have to get decent treatment if they're captured. It does not apply to terrorists or saboteurs. Now think about this. I believe during World War II, a Nazi submarine landed, I believe it was 8 saboteurs off the coast of Florida and I believe Long Island as well. They were captured. And President Roosevelt convened a military tribunal. And I believe most of them, if not all of them, were shot. That's what you do to terrorists or saboteurs. They're not in military uniform, and they don't have any blessings of the Geneva Convention. And so, and you know, there's another thing on this whole terrorism thing, and that is the world there's kind of a underlying respect for terrorism in some places. But look, terrorists exclusively target civilians. Now, in our war on terror, or the Western countries' war on terror, we're not targeting civilians, although there might be civilians killed or injured when we're trying to attack terrorists, but we're not specifically targeting them. And what really got my crawl was during the Israeli war in Lebanon. A newscaster was talking to a head or a senior official in Hezbollah, and he was talking about all the civilian deaths caused by the Israeli attack, And the news person said that, didn't even ask him, well, you're dressed up as a civilian and you're engaging in a war against Israel. I thought that was rather remarkable. But it seems like a lot of people say, well, we got to treat these people nicely, as if we showed the terrorists more humanity, that the terrorists would show us more humanity, and I don't believe that. So that might be one of the issues that's coming up in 2007 that I think that Americans should be well aware of. Now, if a person is not guilty of terrorism, then by no means I think should he be punished. But people who we catch involved in terrorism, I think that they should be punished, and I think the people at Gitmo are living a little bit too long, in my opinion. There's another issue that's in the news, and that has to do with the former Senator John Edwards. He's going to open his bid for the Democratic presidential nomination, and he's claiming an edge over the field of other opponents, of possible nominees such as Hillary, and how do you say this guy, Obama? My brother from Illinois, he might throw his hat in the ring as well. But Edwards says that he wants to develop a universal health care plan. And I don't know whether he's talking about the Canadian plan that we're just talking about the last half hour, where people have to wait so long. And matter of fact, one test, folks, so far as when somebody talks about the Canadian plan, ask them this question. Go to cities like Detroit, Buffalo, Minneapolis, Seattle, and go to the hospitals in those cities. And you'll see many, many Canadian patients. But if you go to the other side of the border, you see few or no American patients. Now ask yourself the question, if the Canadian healthcare system is so good, how come Canadians are rushing to United States for treatment, in emergency treatment? And the caller the last hour, I forget what, maybe it's from Ontario, yeah. Anyway, I advise him to go to my website, and I just recently put up a little clip about this Canadian who wanted brain surgery and the trauma that he had to go through in order to get brain surgery. I believe he ultimately came to the United States. Now, Edwards says that he's also good on global warming. Yeah. Now, last year, remember all those hurricanes that hit us last year, and people were blaming it on Bush. Bush was causing the hurricanes, and it had to do with global warming. And former Senator John Edwards might have the same opinion about hurricanes. But remember the predictions they were making about hurricanes this year? They're saying global warming is going to cause more hurricanes and more weather trauma in the weather trauma. Well, I don't think there was a single major hurricane that hit the United States this year. So what do you think about the predictions of climatologists when they can't get it right this year? Why should we have any confidence in their getting it right 100 years, 50 years from now? I don't know. Maybe there's a simple answer to the question, and maybe a climatologist can call us and tell us why. And then one final idea that Edwards, he says that he's pretty good at dealing with issues such as poverty in the United States. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have a cure for poverty. And it is a cure that your grandmother or my grandmother could have given. It's almost a guarantee that you won't be poor. Now, here's what you do. You graduate from high school. You don't have children until you're married. you stay married, and work at any kind of a job. If you do those 4 things, you won't be poor. Now, if you look at the Bureau of Census Statistics on people who have that characteristic, I believe the number is something between 6 and 9% are poor. And so these are some sensible things, sensible measures not to be poor, because most people who are poor are those people who have had children without the blessing of marriage. They dropped out of high school, they refuse to take work, and they engage in criminal activity. And so if you avoid doing those things, you will not be poor. We'll be back with your calls after this. We're back. Walter Williams sitting in for Rush. You can be on with us by calling 1-800-282-2882. And we've been pushing back the frontiers of ignorance. And let's now go to the phones and welcome Michael from Reading, Pennsylvania.
Hello.
Hello, Michael.
Thank you for taking my call. During your opening monologue, you said that the government controls the release of currency. And my understanding was the Federal Reserve does that. And
Yeah.
Are they not a private bank?
Well, yeah, there's a big argument about that, but they have governmental powers.
Exactly, but
That's
they issue stock that's owned by commercial banks.
Yeah. So what's your point?
Well, I thought that was supposed to be reserved to the Treasury Department.
According to the Constitution, yes.
Well,
and so what Congress has done is delegated some of its power to authority to the Federal Reserve. Now, personally, if you want my opinion, I think we ought to get rid of the Federal Reserve Bank. What do you think?
Thank you.
Or at best, as my late colleague Milton Friedman said, replace the Federal Reserve with a computer that will keep the money supply somewhere around related to our productivity growth rate. And so he would say that you need to only increase the money supply by 2.5–3% a year, depending on our productivity growth.
Okay, that was going to be my next question.
But in general, I would repeal the Federal Reserve Act. And keep in mind, if you look at all the justification for if you look back, look at the congressional record and look at the justification for the Federal Reserve Act, it was to promote solvency in banks, to prevent bank failures, and also to create price stability. And it turns out if you just do a simple before and after study, it turns out that there were more bank failures after the Federal Reserve Act and less price stability after the Federal Reserve Act.
The first thing in their Constitution is to prevent inflation.
Yeah, well, that's price stability, yeah.
Right, so inflation since whenever they came in, like 1912 or something?
Yeah.
What's inflation since then?
Well, no, the inflation rate, as I said earlier, price stability has been lower after the Federal Reserve Act than before the Federal Reserve Act. And one of the see, my point of view, and a lot of people will disagree with me, but I have a number of colleagues that will agree with me. I think that there should be private money. That is, why should the government have a monopoly on money? That is, if I had it my way, I would eliminate all legal tender laws. And that is, for example, I would do 2 things. Eliminate all legal tender laws, and then second, I would eliminate all taxes on gold and silver so that we can write contracts in gold and silver. Let people decide what should be the money. And we had private banking before the Federal Reserve Act. What do you think of that?
I'm not as familiar with that as I don't know.
Well, I strongly recommend some of the writings of a former colleague of mine is George Selgin. He's done a lot of publishing in the field of private banking.
Here's a question. Have you read a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island by Mr. Griffin?
I've just thumbed through it, and I think it's a worthwhile book.
All right.
From my view of it. But thanks for calling in. Folks, we don't have enough time to go before the break. But I want to whet your appetite. Maybe I won't even get into it until the next hour, but I want you to stay tuned. New York and some other cities are going to enact laws saying that restaurants can't put trans fat in our food. That is, we're controlling the restaurants. And in Chicago, the city council passed a law saying that they can't serve foie gras. Now, foie gras has a lot of fat in it, but I think that the reason why they don't want to serve foie gras is that they don't like the way that foie gras is made. They say it's cruelty to animals, it's cruelty to ducks. Now, why has all this stuff happened? You know, talking to restaurants doing this and restaurants doing that. Well, if the government can tell a restaurant owner not to permit smoking in the restaurant, well, the government can tell him to do many things in his restaurant. Now, the smoking Nazis are a result of this, and I'm going to give you more evidence of that in the next hour, so stay tuned. Walter Williams sitting in for Rush, and you can be on with us by calling 800-282-2882. And a little update, folks, from Fox News. They have a little crawler going across the screen, and it says that Saddam Hussein's lawyers say that he will be going to the hangman's noose smiling. Wait till the noose hits him. By the way, speaking of the whole issue in Iraq, people will say, well, we're losing the war in Iraq. I think that's nonsense. I think that our American military fought the most brilliant battle in bringing down the regime of Saddam Hussein. Both the 1991 and the 2003 war will go down history as some of the most successful wars. Now, the problem that our troops are having now is with the occupation. And I think a lot of the problem with the occupation has to do with the rules of engagement and maybe how we fought the war. That is, we fought the war in a very, very clean fashion. That is, we minimized civilian casualties. We did not do like we did in World War II. And we didn't have any occupation. We didn't have many occupation problems at all in Japan and Germany. And the reason why is that we just completely demoralized the people. That is through strategic bombing and just wasting the cities of Germany and Japan. They just had no fight left in them. And so that's maybe a lesson that we can learn from World War II. And there's another issue that bothers me, and I should have brought this up a little bit earlier. And I think that we are losing some of our willingness to defend ourselves. That is, the West in general. To defend ours. I believe that we are in a culture war. And I believe that we're not responding to these petty tyrants the way that we should respond to the petty tyrants. I wrote a column several months ago. It brought a little bit of controversy. And I said, with the whole Iran issue and its development of nuclear weapons. And here's Iran says that it wants to wipe Israel off the face of the map, and they're making all kinds of threats. Well, folks, do you realize that the United States military possesses 18 Ohio-class submarines? That's in addition to all the other stuff that we have. 18 Ohio-class submarines. Now, an Ohio-class submarine carries 24 ballistic missiles. And on each of those ballistic missiles, it has 8 independently targeted nuclear warheads. Now, in terms of dealing with Iran, I would just tell these people, look, we're going to try to find out where your facilities are for making this nuclear equipment. We're not going to send a single soldier over there. We're going to let the Ohio-class submarines do it. And I think that that would be a credible threat. And we have the means to defend ourselves. The West has the means to defend itself against people who want to take over. But it lacks the willingness. And I think that our future generations are going to regret the spinelessness of the current generation. Now, don't get me wrong, folks. I think war is an abomination. But in many cases, not going to war is worse. And we kind of think back during the 1930s when Hitler was violating the Versailles Treaty. You're making weapons that he should not have made. And in 1934, 35, when he was rearming, France alone could have defeated him. But the West, in terms of appeasing Hitler, allowed him to gain the kind of strength that led to 50 or 60 million people being killed in World War II. And so we have to ask this question: if we had preemptively attacked Germany during the 30s, we might have saved tens of millions of lives. And so all the peacemongers that were saying that we should not fight, we should appease Hitler, shouldn't they feel somewhat guilty about these millions of lives that were lost in World War II that could have been spared had the West had the guts to say, Hitler, you're violating the Versailles Treaty, and we're going to do something about it? I think those people, they ought to be condemned. Those people who did not want to stop Hitler. And I think it's you know, and when you're looking at history, it's improper to make analogies. Iran is not where Germany was during the 30s. But if we allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons, I think it's going to be a rough time for the West, particularly and also the Middle East. But ladies and gentlemen, this is a problem that's going to affect future generations. But you know, for politicians today, all they're looking at is 2 years down the line or 4 years down the line when they stand for re-election. So they don't care what's in the long-run interest of the United States. They care what's in their short-run interests. And I think tragically, that's going to mean tragedy for United States and also the West. But let's take a phone call from Bill from Chicago. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Hi, good afternoon. I just heard you say before about how the Canadians come down here for their health care because, well, your logic was ours must be better than theirs if they're coming down here. And I was just wondering...
Well, it's available. They don't have to wait.
Well, I was just wondering, what does it say when citizens from this country are going over to the Far East, especially India, to get their operations?
Oh, yeah. And many go because it's cheaper. And then also, Some people go because they want a kidney or a liver or a lung, and they want to buy one. And where the sale of organs in the United States is illegal, but the sale of organs in India, I don't know whether it's legal or illegal, but it gets done.
Well, I've never heard of that.
Oh, yeah.
How much do they go for?
Pardon me?
How much do they sell them for?
I don't know, but I think that we ought to be able to. I think they're selling of one's organs in the United States. I think ought to be legal. I mean, if you ask the question, whose kidneys are mine? I mean, who do my kidneys belong to? Now, if you say that George Bush or the United States owns my kidneys, well, I don't have the right to sell them. But if I might ask you, caller, who do they belong to?
It'd be the individual's kidneys. No one else can take them.
And so what's the test? What's the true test of whether you own something? Well, the true test of whether you own something is whether you can sell it. That is, I own my car, and the proof that I own my car is that I can sell my car. Or I have a tie on, and the proof that I own this tie is that I can sell the tie.
So would you also be in favor of prostitution?
Oh, yes.
What about legalized drugs and get the government to get all the money from that instead of the criminals?
I would, look, anybody who's... Wait a minute. Yeah, since we own ourselves, I think you have the right to do damage to yourself. And I think that using drugs, heroin, cocaine, and marijuana, I think that it does damage to you. But I think that the person, if he owns himself, he has the right to do damage. Now, what the laws do, the drug laws that we have in our country, we force people who are dead set on destroying their own lives, let's say through the use of cocaine or heroin, destroying their own lives, we're forcing them to destroy somebody else's, some innocent person's life in the process of destroying their own life. And so, through gunfire and drug wars and activities that like that. And then we also encourage, by drugs being illegal, we encourage the corruption of officials. That is, the only way so much cocaine and heroin can get into the United States is through corrupting officials. And so here's my question. My question is, if a person wants to destroy his own life, should we have a system that forces him to destroy others' lives in the process? Why not just allow him to destroy his own life? And but see, so far, going back to your original question about selling organs, look, if we could sell organs, I think that we'd have more organs available. That is, people, I have two good working kidneys, I could sell one. Or, alternatively, I can just imagine. I was telling my doctor this because he's against selling organs. I was telling him, I said that I could just imagine when I'm dying, or when I'm almost dead, I'm brain dead or whatever, and a doctor says, to ask my daughter, can we harvest your father's organs? And my daughter might say, no, you can't take anything from my father's body. I want him to be buried just like he came here. But imagine a doctor saying to my daughter, we'll give you $20,000 for his kidneys. We'll give you $10,000 for his liver. I can just see my daughter say, cut away. Do you want his eyes too? And so what that would do, that would increase the supply of organs. That's the wonder of the market. We'll be back with your calls after this.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
New Haven's News Talk 960 WELI.
We're back, pushing back frontiers of ignorance, and you can be on with us by calling 1-800-282-2882. And let's go to the phones and welcome Bob from Wilkesboro, Pennsylvania. Welcome, Bob.
Good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call, Dr. Williams. I have an economic question, and I thought you'd be probably one of the best people to answer it. It's been in the back of my mind for years now. Is there ever a situation where a company or an industry trying to drive down its labor costs and takes the manufacturing offshore, but actually in the end reduces the demand for their end product?
Well, I don't know of any particular cases. I know that some companies, I think Microsoft, had many call centers in India, and I believe that they brought them back to the United States because they were not satisfied with the performance that they were getting from their call centers overseas.
Well, I'll give you an example that's bothered me. Boeing Airlines, they manufacture airplanes, but their end product is not airplanes, it is passenger miles. And if they build planes in China and don't pay the people enough to buy tickets, or the Chinese government restricts the travel of those people, versus building the planes in America where the employees can afford to travel, is there really a factor there that they haven't taken into account when they go for the low rate?
No, look, I think businesses, they're out for profits. They want to make money. And they're going to do the kind of things that will earn them the money. And so I would think that Boeing would never open up an airplane factory in China. Matter of fact, China just doesn't even have the technology. Matter of fact, they were building a plane some years ago, and the plane was so heavy it wouldn't take off.
Well, Boeing has talked about it, though.
Well, they can talk, but I'd like to see people put their money where their mouth is. And so, but the whole offshoring, I think it's, or outsourcing, what people call it, I think it's much ado about nothing. That is, I think that a business is most efficient if it can produce for consumers goods at the lowest possible price. And I believe that they help their investors also by producing goods at the lowest possible cost. We're all richer. And I wrote a column about this some time ago when people are complaining about offshoring and importing and international trade deficits. And I pointed out that if we were to become self-sufficient in everything, we would be a much poorer nation. We'll be back with your calls after this.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
New Haven's News Talk 960 WELI.
Just a couple more minutes and we're going to go right to the phone and welcome Terry from Sacramento, California. Welcome.
Hey, wow, I made it. Hey, to the point. Yeah, I agree with you that a person's body is, it's up to the person to take care of their own, to do what they think their own body. However, we should not be the ones to have to clean up behind them, i.e., if they have to go to the hospital for injury, or when they do damage, they go in the hospital to for care and stuff like that. And then, you know what I'm saying on that one?
Yeah, you're right. You're saying that that one person should not be able to live at the expense of another person.
That's correct.
And that is
it's their body to do what they want with.
That is right. That is, they have to bear the responsibility. Give people freedom, and at the same time, they have to bear their own personal responsibility.
Correct.
And for most of our history, we have not had Medicare or all these health care programs, and there's no evidence of people dying in the streets because they weren't getting medical treatment, stepping over dead bodies in the street, not in the United States. And before, the medical care was not as expensive, and then there was the charity. I believe, by the way, as I said in the first hour, I think that charity is the best way to help our fellow man. And private charity is far more efficient than government charity because, let's say, a person goes to a doctor or to a hospital that's providing private charity, and the person is really messing up, coming back with the same problem. The guy's maybe they're going to get fed up with him and say, well, look, I'm not going to treat you this time, stupid. And that will convey a message to other people. That is, that if they know that one person is held to account for his actions, then maybe other people will begin to account for their actions. But if you tell people, look, no matter what you do, no matter how irresponsible you are, we're going to make Walter Williams pick up the tab. And, through the agents of Congress. Now, if you tell people that, they'll always be that way. I mean, we are becoming a nation of wimps. We're afraid to tell people, look, as my mother used to tell me, if you make your bed hard, you're going to lie in it. Or else sometimes she told me, you're going to stew in your own juice. And that made me a little more accountable. But maybe it might seem cruel, but it's the best thing my mother could have done. We'll be back.
You know who he is. He's the man who has ignorance and tyranny on the run. Liberals fear him, liberty lovers adore him, and the ladies wish there were hundreds more just like him. It's Walter E. Williams in the Attila the Hun chair, filling in for Rush Limbaugh.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It is Walter Williams, and you can be on with us by calling 1-800-282-2882. And last time I kind of teased the subject for this hour, and I'm going to talk about several things this hour. And one has to do with this big trans fat hullabaloo. And New York has already placed limits on the restaurants' use of trans fats, and probably other cities are going to follow. Now, the American Council on Science and Health, and you can go to their website and read it, and they just point out that there's a lot of panic being created about the effect of trans fats on cardiovascular health. That means the health of the heart and the circulatory system. And one of the risks is that, well, if you get rid of banned restaurants' use of trans fat, well, what are they going to substitute? Well, they might substitute some saturated fats, and that will be even more unhealthy than trans fats. But a more critical issue is, what right does the government have in making these edicts to a restaurant? Maybe the restaurant should maybe say on the menu, maybe, I'm not even sure about this, well, we're serving trans fats. And as I said in the last hour, there's a movement to outlaw the sales of foie gras. And because the way that foie gras is produced, they feed ducks or geese or whatever animal they use. Inordinate amounts of food that makes their liver very fat and unhealthy, and that's what foie gras is made out of. And some of the people pushing this, they call it cruelty to animals. But at the heart, or the maybe stimulus for all these controls, goes back to the movement against smoking. And smoking in restaurants, and the bogus claims by the EPA about the people dying from secondhand smoke. Now, how the EPA did this study, the way they did the study, a graduate student at writing a PhD, writing a dissertation, he'd be dismissed from college if he used any of the techniques that the EPA used in reaching its conclusions about the dangerous effects of secondhand smoke. Now, first of all, I know smoke irritates people, and I know that it stinks. A lot of people think that it stinks. But so they should have made their campaign on that, which I doubt whether they would be successful. But they had to tie it to a health issue. Now, the way the EPA did its study, in most statistical studies, you want a 99% level of confidence. Well, the EPA tried that, and they didn't get the result that they wanted. And then they went to 95%, and then to 90%. And anybody doing a study and doing that, manipulating figures like that, would be deemed as intellectually dishonest. And matter of fact, for those of you who are interested, you can just check out the British Medical Journal, and it's the largest single study of the connection between passive smoking and mortality. And it's a 39-year analysis, over 35,000 Californians, and it was published in the British Medical Journal, and it found no connection between passive smoking and mortality. And I believe the World Health Organization did a similar study, and they reached the same conclusion. Now, whether cigarette smoke bothers anybody or causes harm to anybody, that is entirely irrelevant to the issue. That is, it's an issue of private property rights. That is, maybe if I'm a restaurant owner, who wishes smoking in his restaurant, then maybe I put up a sign and I say, this restaurant permits smoking, and let you decide whether you want to come in under those conditions. Similarly, a restaurant owner who does not want smoking, he put out a sign, no smoking, and then I decide whether I want to enter the restaurant under those conditions. Those are the liberty-oriented ways of handling the issue, as opposed to wanting people using the political system to forcibly impose their preferences on others. Now, here's a question I haven't had adequately answered. Let's say that you hate smoking, you own a restaurant, and let's say a bunch of smokers go to the city council and they're able to use their political power to force you to permit smoking in your restaurant. How would you view that? You'd probably view it as tyranny. Well, it works the same way on the other foot. That is, a guy who wants to permit smoking and people are able to use a political mechanism to force him not to permit smoking, well, that's tyranny just the same. But see, most Americans, and it's sad for me to say this as an American with our heritage of liberty, that most Americans feel that it's somehow justified, if they have a majority, to be able to use the political system to impose their preferences on other people. And I think that that is hostile to the notions of liberty. Then, see, what happens after that, you establish a template. And the people who are trying to stop the use of trans fat in restaurants, they are using the template of the anti-smoking campaign. It worked for the anti-smokers. Well, why not work for the anti-trans fat people, or the people who are against the serving of foie gras? See, once you let the politicians know that they have the right to control your lives, I don't think they're just going to stop at smoking in restaurants, trans fat in restaurants, or foie gras. They're going to go further, because I have yet to come across a tyrant in history that wakes up one morning and says, I'm tired of tyrannizing people and I'm going to let them go free. I just know of no evidence of that. So, but you Americans, you believe that, or many believe that Congress has the right to do anything upon which it can get a majority vote on. And that's a sad thing. That is because majority rule, or a democracy, was offensive to the founders of our nation. Just read some of the works by John Adams and others, feeling how contemptible they were of the idea of a democracy, because a democracy is nothing but mob rule, or as I believe it was Madison who pointed out, James Madison, that it's just simply the tyranny of the majority. So anyway, it doesn't look great for the future of our country so long as we Americans are going to allow politicians or allow people to use the political system to run roughshod over us. Now here's another issue in the news. It was in the Wall Street Journal today, and the title of it's called McCain-Feingold in the Dock. And so anyway, the McCain-Feingold campaign finance law says that, well, within it bans certain kinds of political ads in the 30 days before a primary and 60 days before a general election. Now it turned out that the anti-abortion group, they ran television and radio spots. They were informing the public that certain U.S. senators were filibustering President Bush's judicial nominees. And they also said that the people in Wisconsin should contact their Democrat senators and congressmen to oppose them to get them to oppose the filibuster. Anyway, they were taken to court for violation of the McCain-Feingold reform for campaign financing. Anyway, the Supreme Court, it's likely that the Supreme Court is going to have a chance to review the McCain-Feingold. I think that the McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform law, I think it is offensive to the principles of free speech. That saying that, well, gee, you can't use your money to promote free speech or to promote your ideas. I think it's offensive. And I personally think that free speech is something that's absolute. That is, people have the right to express themselves. Now, I know some of you are going to call in and say, I know there's some lawyer types out there going to call in and say, well, I'm going to save them a call. Well, you can't shout fire in a crowded theater. Well, that has nothing to do with free speech. That has something to do with violation of contracts. That is, when I go to a movie, I expect to see a movie. I expect to see a movie. I paid my way. I don't expect to see it interrupted. So that's what somebody hollering fire in a crowded theater would be doing. He'd be violating my right to a contract that I made with the theater company. Now, if there's on the marquee when you're getting ready to go in the theater, if there's a sign saying during the show somebody's going to holler fire, well that would be okay. That'd be okay, because I go in there, I know that somebody's going to holler fire, and maybe the performance will be disrupted. And a matter of fact, there's some controversy a couple of years ago, because I said that I think free speech even goes to libel and slander. That is, I don't think that people should be prosecuted for libel and slander. And so a lot of people say, well, libel and slander hurts somebody's reputation. Well, who does your reputation belong to? Does your reputation belong to you? No, it doesn't. That is, what others think of you is not your property. And so I have the right to say anything I want. I should have the right. Of course, the law does not allow me. We'll be back with your calls after this.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
Walter Williams here, pushing back the frontiers of ignorance, and this is the last Friday of 2006, and I'm giving one last go at trying to sell my fellow Americans on the moral superiority of liberty. And let's go back to the phones and talk to Harry from Vienna, Virginia, very close to George Mason University. Welcome to the show, Harry.
2 blocks away. Thanks for taking my call, Dr. Williams. I'm calling to find out if you would agree with me that the Congress has enacted a new income tax, but they're not calling it that. they're calling it means testing. And what I'm referring to is the new law that is going to raise the premiums on the Part B premiums on people who make a certain level of income.
Of course, it's raising taxes. And similar, they're talking about upping the amount of your pay that's subject to the Social Security and the Medicare tax.
Yeah, well, this bill was the 2003 law that created the drug benefit, and it's in that particular bill. And it was supposed to take effect in 2007, but the Senate, the reconciliation bill for the budget in 2006 moved it up to 2006. They just couldn't wait to get their hands in your pockets.
That's right.
The thing I don't know, I never looked up on this 2003 bill, the one that created the drug benefit. I don't know if that originated in the Senate or the House, because if it originated in the Senate, it would be unconstitutional.
Well, matter of fact, several years ago, Ron Paul, Congressman Ron Paul from Houston, Texas, he brought suit on that very issue. That is, I believe it was 1986 tax law that he said that originated in the Senate, and all tax bills are supposed to originate in the House of Representatives. And the court held that he had no standing to bring suit. That is, the Supreme Court of the United States cannot force Congress to obey the United States Constitution. That's a tragedy, I think. So here we are. Let's go to Chris in Morgantown, West Virginia. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks a lot. I'm a big-time listener. I'm calling from wild, wonderful West Virginia. I'm actually just going back on a bit you did on the organ selling, and your point on the fact that, since we own our bodies, we should have kind of our own personal property. We should be able to sell them. I'm totally in agreement. Being my age right now, if I had the ability to sell my kidney and make a little bit of money, of course I would love to do that. But I'm pretty sure that in other countries, organ selling is a big problem on the black market. And I think it's one thing if you own your car and somebody comes up and steals your car, you lose your car, that's it, and it's gone forever, or they find it. But with something like an organ, if you've got that and you're able to sell it, there's a big chance, I think, that you could have an underground black market that opens up, and you're walking down the alley, you get taken to the side, and then you lose a kidney, you're not getting that thing back.
Well, look, I've heard that kind of criticism before, and are you saying that if there's a practice and there's a chance of illegal use or illegality, that we should eliminate the practice? That is, for example, let's say some doctors or let's say some grocery stores, they can sell rotten meat. Well, just because some grocer will sell rotten meat, does that mean that you have to stop the sales of meat? No. That is, you prosecute the people who are behaving illegally. That is, the people who are stealing organs, who are killing people to get organs. You prosecute them. That is, you don't eliminate something. I think it's very, very valuable.
No, and I agree, and that was my other point, was to say that I think maybe at this time in the present we might not be there as far as being able to implement something like that, but I think maybe in the future when we can have our DNA and be able to go in and say, I want to give, I want to sell my organ, and they can match that kidney to you and say, okay, this is this person's organ, then you can go ahead and get into something like that. Oh,
absolutely right. And I think that in the case of somebody who is terminally ill, who's brain dead, that is, and he's in a hospital, then there's not much of a problem there. That is, there are doctors and there are officials there, and you ask the next of kin, can you harvest his organs? And I think that the next of kin would be far more willing to donate the organs or sell the organs if there was a price for it. Matter of fact, I was talking to my doctor. He's an internist, and he, for years he tells me, Walter, you're in perfect health, but you should stop smoking. And so I asked him. I said, does it make sense to put pink lungs into the ground? Now I said, if my lungs could become a part of my estate, I would take better care of them. The optimal way to die is with everything wrong with you. That is, it's just like the optimal bank account to have when you die is 0. It's the same thing with your body. You should die with nothing left. We'll be back. The last half hour of the year, and we're still pushing back. We're still enthusiastic that we can sell our fellow Americans on liberty. One of the issues in the news right now is the minimum wage. And the Congress is talking about, the Democrats saying, well, as soon as they get in, they want to raise the minimum wage from $5.15 an hour, I don't know, maybe $7-something an hour. Well, ladies and gentlemen, and the Republicans will probably go along with it, and for a good reason, I think, and which I'll get back to just a second. Well, the intentions, for the most part, behind support for higher minimum wage, I think are very good. That is, people want to see their fellow workers earn a little more money. But the effects of the minimum wage are harmful for a large segment of workers. And those workers are low-skilled workers. And you see the effect of a minimum wage. If you say, look, no matter whom you hire, you tell an employer, no matter whom you hire, you must pay them $5.15 an hour, plus their mandated fringes. You have to pay Social Security, and you have to pay workman's compensation, unemployment compensation, things like this. And a lot of people say that's about a third of the hourly pay. But let's stick with $5.15 for simplicity. Okay, no matter whom you hire, you must pay them $5.15 an hour. You're an employer now. So I ask you, if you must pay $5.15 an hour no matter whom you hire, will you hire that worker who is so unfortunate so as to have skills that will only enable him to produce, say, $3 worth of value per hour? No, you wouldn't. So the effect of the minimum wage is to discriminate against the employment of the lowest skilled workers. And there have been two important surveys by academic economists, and they're reported in the American Economic Review, one in 1979 and 1992, and 90% of academic economists agreed that increasing the minimum wages caused unemployment among youth and low-skilled workers. And if you look at the unemployment statistics, you find that the youth unemployment is some multiple of the adult unemployment rate. And then there's another aspect of the minimum wage law that people don't pay a lot of attention to, or people are just completely ignorant of it, and that is the minimum wage law contributes or lowers the cost of engaging in racial discrimination by employers. And a kind of classic case of this was a study I did a number of years ago. It's actually turned into a book. And the title of the book is South Africa's War Against Capitalism. And let me just read, and in South Africa, the major supporters of increases in the minimum wage law, in South Africa they call it the rate for the job, but it's the same as the minimum wage. The major supporters of increasing the minimum wage laws were racist unions who would never have a black as a member of their union. And what was their stated purpose? Well, let me just read a quote by one of the union officials, and it's Gerrit Bietke. He was the secretary of South Africa's Building Workers Union, and he said, quote, "There is no job reservation left in the building industry," and job reservation was reserving certain jobs to whites only. "There is no job reservation left in the building industry, and in those circumstances, I support the minimum wages as the second best way of protecting our white artisans." That is, the minimum wage law is one of the most effective tools in the arsenal of racists all around the world. Now you say not in the United States. Well, here's another little assignment for you folks out there. The Davis-Bacon Act, which is still on the books today, is a super minimum wage. And the Davis-Bacon Act requires that the prevailing wage, actually the union wage, be paid on all federally financed and assisted construction. Now, how did we get the Davis-Bacon Act? Well, the Davis-Bacon Act was written in 1931. And I urge you to read the congressional record, the United States Congressional Record, and page 6513. And you listen to congressmen supporting, U.S. congressmen supporting the Davis-Bacon Act, saying things like this. One congressman, I'm virtually quoting him, it was Congressman Allgood. And he said, see that contract over there? He has cheap colored labor that he brings up, puts them in cabins, and it's labor of that sort that's in competition with white America. And that's why we need the Davis-Bacon Act. And so it's a racist everywhere. They recognize that by setting minimum prices is one of the most effective tools for furthering their agenda. And here you have good Americans supporting a kind of law that will cut off the bottom rungs of the economic ladder for low-skilled people, and also contribute to what I call preference indulgence. That is, people hiring according to their preferences. But anyway, most Americans think, or many Americans think, that Davis-Bacon Act is a good idea. Now, the Republicans, they should, in terms of political expediency, they'll probably go along with the minimum wage increases. Why? Because in the political arena, you dump on people who can't dump back on you. And the major victims of the minimum wage law are young workers, teenagers. And what congressman or senator owes his office to the teenage vote? And so none of them. So you dump on teenagers. And moreover, from the Republican point of view, the major beneficiaries of not raising the minimum wage law would be low-skilled black teenagers. Well, the Republicans are not going to get that much of the black vote anyway, so why should they go along with fighting the minimum wage? They should just kind of go along to get along in that case. In terms of political expediency, I'm not expecting courage and moral principles from our men that we elect to the Congress, but for political expediency, why fight it? Anyway, folks, we have time to take a call. Yes, we do. John from Minneapolis. Welcome to the show, John.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency. It's a great honor to gain your audience with you today, and I'm genuflecting right now, but this is radio, so you can't see it.
Okay.
Quick comment before I get to my question is that the next time you sub for Rush, I'd like to hear you debate that goofy Lou Dobbs about outsourcing and all that other stuff he whines and cries about on his program.
Well, he's beyond the pale, and I'm never going to convince him, but I'm going to try to convince the American people through my syndicated columns that he is absolutely wrong.
Well, you can demonstrate to the audience as well.
Okay, yeah, right.
But what I'm really here to inquire about is the process by which you were declared the leader of all the white people, and who will succeed you in the unfortunate event of your untimely demise. And I'll hang up.
Well, there's even a question about my demise, and probably my daughter. She will probably be my follower. But anyway, you asked, how did I become the white leader? Well, it's kind of a self-appointed position. Rush, he appointed himself as the black leader. And so I said, well, I might as well be the white leader. And what I've done as the leader of white people, I have an amnesty and pardon forgiving all white people, actually it's all people of European ancestry, for both their own grievances and those of their forebears against my people. And the reason why I've created this, matter of fact, you can go to my website, walterwilliams.com, and click on gifts, and there it is. And the reason why I did this is because a lot of white people, they feel guilty about slavery. And so the reason why I created this amnesty and pardon was so that you stop feeling guilty and stop acting like damn fools. That is, a lot of white people will accept behavior of blacks from blacks that they wouldn't begin to accept from whites, and the reason is that they feel guilty. And so anyway, I became the white leader because I wanted to provide leadership, because white people need leadership as well. And matter of fact, one interesting thing about this leadership business, I've asked myself, when people talk about black leaders, I say, who's the Chinese leader? Who's the Irish leader? I couldn't come up with names. Who's the Armenian leader? I couldn't come up with any names, and so I said, what kind of assumptions must one make about blacks to say that we alone need leaders? And I find those assumptions as a black man somewhat embarrassing. But, however, getting back to your question, how did I become the white leader? I appointed myself, and I think many white people are happy that I'm leading them, and we'll be back with your calls after this. We're back with you, and you can be on with us by calling 1-800-282-2882. By the way, Kit Carson just informed me that several of you ladies who have been reluctant to come on the phone with me, you've called in to say that, oh, I just love him. And so Kit says, well, why don't you get on and tell him? I don't want to tell him, so I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed, but I don't know. But anyway, you ladies who have called, I love you too. But my heart belongs to Mrs. Williams. Anyway, let's welcome Nicole to the show from Niagara Falls, Canada. Welcome to the show.
Hi. It's an honor to speak with you, Professor Walter E. Williams, and I am not ashamed to say that I love you, despite Mrs. Williams.
Thank you.
Anyhow, my question pertains to that of academia. You have spoken before about the growing intolerance for intellectual diversity in academia, in universities. And Mr. Limbaugh has frequently referred to the university institution and the public school system as vehicles for the indoctrination of young minds. And I actually got interested in the study of popular culture because of the smoking Nazis, and actually presented the exact same argument you presented today in class about 6 years ago. And it was after 9/11 that I did a complete 180 from the sciences into the humanities, into studying the humanities at the university level. I wanted to ask you if you know of a particular professor or one of your colleagues that is studying the media or popular culture at an American university that is more conservative in nature.
Well, I have a colleague who's done a lot of research, and I've relied on a lot of research. His name is Professor Dan Klein, and you can go to his website. And he's done a number of studies in conjunction with another colleague, and I can't think of the colleague's name. She's, I think, from Sweden, pointing out the open bias and the lack of intellectual or ideological diversity on college campuses. And he shows that at many college campuses, up to 90% of the professors in some departments, in some cases 100% of the professors in some departments, they, according to surveys that he's done, they vote Democratic. So the thrust of the college campuses is left-wing professors who use their classes to indoctrinate. They use their classes to proselytize students, which I think is academic dishonesty.
Yes.
I've been teaching for 37 years, and I would challenge anyone to find any previous student of mine who can say that I taught something in class other than microeconomics. That is, I think that to the kind of opinions I express on the Rush Show and in my syndicated columns, they're never expressed in class, because these are my opinions, and it is academic dishonesty to try to sell students or to use your opinions in class. And now a student might ask me about something I wrote in the column, and I'll say, well, see me after class or come during my office hours, because that's not the topic of discussion. And so I try to be academically honest, but I'm afraid that most of my colleagues, not necessarily in our economics department, we probably have the only totally free market economics department in the world, and we have very distinguished. We have 2 Nobel laureates on our faculty, as well as a number of up-and-coming young scholars. And we have the probably the only totally free market department in the class in the world. And the reason how we became a free market is not that we give people political tests, but we tend to attract those people who have free market or sometimes Austrian ideas, and we get this both from the students and we attract those kind of students, and we also attract those kind of professors. But thanks a lot, Nicole, for calling, and that's a very, very important issue, the lack of intellectual diversity on college campuses. We'll be back with more of your calls after this. We're back, folks. You know, when we went to the break, my engineer, Mike Mamone, said, that free advertising that you give them at George Mason University is going to come out of your pay. Well, folks, it's not going to be much out of my pay because Rush only gives me a minimum wage. And so I'm not going to be hit very hard. But anyway, folks, let's probably take the last call of the year. And that is Brian from Columbus, Ohio. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Hey, Walter.
Hi.
Hey, I love you in a manly sort of way.
It better be a manly sort of way. I mean, I'll come out there and punch you out.
I got 2 quick things, and I'm supposed to hang up. Number one is with all the free market talk we've been talking about, how do you deal with the issue of illegal immigration and the free markets? And can I plug my business?
No, you can't. Okay, but anyway, look, my sentiments about immigration, are expressed at the foot or at the Statue of Liberty. That is, we welcome immigrants from all around the world. But however, I think that our big immigration problem is a failure of government. One, the failure of our government to make immigration easy for people who want to come here legally and work. There's because we have people jumping through hoops to try to come to the United States. So I think we should do something to make that streamline the immigration procedures. And I think we ought to do something to protect our borders. That is, to stop illegal immigration into the United States. But however, try to do what we can to make foreigners come here legally, to enable them to come here legally. But there's another question, and I think we should use force at our borders. That is, if somebody's coming across into our border, crossing our country, our policemen should be able to say stop or I'll shoot, and if he doesn't stop, shoot him. And a lot of people say, Williams, that's extreme. Well, that's what we would do at Kennedy Airport. People going through customs. If
Southern Connecticut traffic can be a real problem. Count on 960 WELI to give you the solutions you need. Morning, afternoon, and evenings.